Hello and welcome. This is lecture number 14, Labor Market Discrimination for seminars in Advanced Human Resource Economics. This is a PhD course. And in this lecture has to be accompanied with the presentation, student presentation. So this will be shorter in length as compared to the other lectures that I've uploaded. And in this lecture, we'll look at some of the basic concepts surrounding discrimination in labor market. And we'll also cover Oaxaca-Blinder methodology. We'll cover some of the concepts that are prevalent and mostly discussed in labor economics related to the discrimination in labor market. So without further ado, let's get on to it. So labor market discrimination, what does that mean? It means that differences in earnings and employment opportunities may arise even among equally skilled workers employed in the same job simply because of the worker's race, gender, national origin, sexual orientation, or other seemingly irrelevant characteristics. So if I can manufacture 100 units of bricks, for example, if I get paid because I'm a male $1 per brick, then labor market discrimination suggests that in labor market, just because somebody is a female, even though she can also manufacture 100 bricks just like myself, but she'll be paid less than me because simply of her gender. And this is also true when you apply it to the race. White as compared to Hispanic as compared to blacks, and national origin as well. We clearly see this in the United Arab Emirates, that some nationalities are preferred over the others. I'm giving example of United Arab Emirates because most of the workers, I think more than 80%, if not 90%, are immigrants, and based on their national origin, they are paid more or less. And sexual orientation as well. So it's not only gender but also sexual orientation. Wages can vary because of these characteristics that may seem irrelevant. And it's not always a prejudice. So a prejudice would mean that I, for example, do not like blacks, so I will give them less pay. So that will be the definition of prejudice. But it could also be a signal. It could also be an information to fill in the information gaps. For example, if there is an information that some type of people are more prone to engage in some bad social habits, then even though I do not dislike them just because of their color, on average their behavior is an indication that I may or may not hire them, or I give them less pay. So an example is of traffic police stops in the United States, when black drivers are more likely to be stopped because on average they have found that on average they found drugs and weapons in cars that are being operated by black drivers. So it may not be the result of the hate against black drivers. It's just a statistical average that these drivers are more likely to commit crimes than the other race. So I'm not saying that this is the right way to go about it, but I'm just saying that it's not always because of the hate or prejudice against some races or some genders and so on. So what do the numbers tell us? The research tells us that men earn more than women, about 51%, and whites usually earn more than non-whites. American men who are perceived as having above average looks earn 4 percentage points than average men, while men who are perceived as ugly earn 9% less. Okay, so looks also matter in this regard. Differences in educational attainment between white and non-whites account for a portion of the wage differential as well. So it's not only because of the prejudice, but also on average, if if white male are more educated than black males, so this also contributes towards the discrimination here. And beautiful women earn 8 percentage points more than average women, and while ugly women earn 4% less. Now, how do you define ugly men and ugly women? These are very valid questions, but this is what the research tells us. You can ask many questions. I can assume that you are already thinking about the problems with this research, and which is a very good sign. So I'm not saying that you have to believe everything 100% as it is given here, but these numbers are not made up by myself. These are coming out of the research that has been done before. Black men in Canada earn 18% less than Canadian whites. So even though Canada is the symbol of equality, and you see many ads and many advertisements, people in Pakistan love Canada for their equality and so on. But research is saying something very, very different. So black men in Canada earn 18% less than Canadian whites. Of course, they compared men of similar aptitude, and they found out that their race is the most important factor that differentiates their wages. And in Britain, non-white immigrants earn 10 to 20% less than similarly skilled white immigrants. We're not even comparing with the local immigrants. We are simply comparing immigrants that are white and non-white. So there is a 10 to 20% difference in wages, even though they are equally capable. So this is problematic. This is troubling. Discrimination coefficient. Now we are moving towards theoretical side of things. We have seen some numbers. And now to grasp the concept, because Gary Becker has taught us to apply economic concepts in different aspects of life. You might have read Theory of Marriage, his very famous paper. And in that paper, he related the information asymmetry in marriage to information asymmetry in labor markets as well. So it's a very good read. I highly recommend that you read that paper. So applying that concept here is very, very interesting. So Becker's theory of labor market discrimination is based on the concept of taste discrimination. Suppose that there are two types of workers in the labor market, white workers and black workers. A competitive employer faces constant prices of these inputs. WW is the wage rate for the white worker, and WB is the wage rate for the black worker. If the employer is prejudiced against blacks, the employer gets disutility from hiring black workers. So even though it costs only WB dollars to hire one person hour of black employee, the employer will act as if it cost WB 1 plus D, WB multiplied by 1 plus D dollars, where D is the positive number and is called the discrimination coefficient. What does that mean? It means that let's assume that WW right here, WB right here, these are both $100. Let's assume that. Now, we know that this one is for white worker, this one is for black worker. Now, if the employer is biased against black workers, then because he dislikes black workers, he will not feel comfortable. He will not be hiring a black person. So even though he's paying from his pocket $100, but in economic terms, his cost is higher than 100 units because he's not happy in hiring this person. So in real terms, he's actually spending more money on this employee. So even though the black employee, in my example, even though the black employee is getting $100 and white employee is also getting $100, but for employer, hiring a black worker is more expensive because the employer is not happy in hiring him. So there is an economic cost also associated with hiring this person. Because he is not happy, his perceived wage, so notice this word, perceived wage, is higher than what he is actually paying him. So his pocket, he's paying $100 from his pocket, but since he's not happy, if he hired a white person, he would be happy hiring this person. A white person would do the job, he will pay $100, and everything will be okay. But since he's hiring a black worker, even though he's doing 100% of the job, since he's not happy hiring this person, his economic cost, because he's not happy, the utility is lower. So monetary equivalent of a utility is this discrimination coefficient right here. So since this guy is not happy hiring this black worker, so the wage will not be $100 anymore. So assuming that this discrimination coefficient is 0.2, it would mean that the employer will perceive to pay $120 rather than 100 because of the disutility associated with hiring this black worker. So now, after incorporating this discrimination coefficient, economically speaking, academically, it's very easy to compare and find out if this employer will hire a white worker or a black worker. Because even though he's paying $100 to both of them, his perceived payment for black worker is 120, his perceived payment to the white worker is 100. So naturally, we can clearly see that he'll hire a white worker because he perceives to pay less to the white worker. So even in monetary terms, after accounting for the discrimination coefficient, it makes much more sense to hire a white worker because it costs him less, even though in hypothetical terms, psychological terms. And this is actually the demonstration of what I just showed you. Suppose that WB is $10, D I assume 0.2, here it is 0.5, and so this is a markup in the cost of hiring, perceived cost. Okay, so it's the same thing that I just mentioned. So for you to just have a look later on. Nepotism is the reverse of if I dislike a black person, then I perceive the cost to be higher. In nepotism, if I prefer to hire black, if I am black myself, and if I prefer to hire my fellow black workers, then my perceived cost will be lower. Okay, so even though I'm paying, again continuing the same example, even though I'm paying $100 to both white and black workers, since I like black workers, working with the black workers makes me happy, gives me extra utility. So in monetary terms, my perceived cost, my perceived wages for the black workers will be lower because I like hiring these black people, black workers. Okay, so the concept is slightly different. It's the reverse because my perceived wages are lower. If the black employers prefer to hire black workers, they will act as if hiring a black worker is cheaper than it actually is. All right. So the same concept can be applied in other contexts as well. So white workers, for instance, might dislike working alongside black workers. So right now we were talking about employers and employees. Okay, so now we can apply the same concept to different employees working together. So as an employee, if I am going to apply for a job, and if I know that this is a predominantly black firm and I am a white person and I do not like to work with the black people, then my perceived wages will be lower. So even though the employer might be paying me $100, I will perceive it to be 80, for example, because I will have to work with black workers whom I do not like very much. So you can apply this concept to employee discrimination as well. You can also apply the same to customer discrimination as well. So if you go to a shop where if I am a white person and I do not like black person, so if I go to a shop owned by a black person, then even though I'm buying a chewing gum for $1, my perceived cost of buying that chewing gum will be higher, because I have to face this black person. I don't like to buy from the black person. So since in this whole exercise, this discrimination coefficient is actually putting a value to my dislikeness or likeness. In case of nepotism, it will be likeness. In case of discrimination, it will be dislikeness. So I'm putting a monetary value just to understand why I don't like to buy from a black shop. I don't like to buy from a black shop because there is a discrimination coefficient involved. Since in economics we want to compare everything in monetary terms, economic cost and economic benefits. So accounting for the economic value of buying something from a black store, even if it is for $1, my perceived cost will be higher, let's say $1.2, because I do not like to buy from the black shop. So if there were two adjacent shops of chewing gums, one owned by a white person, one by a black person, then I would like to buy from a white shop, because my perceived cost of buying the chewing gum from the black shop is much higher than the white shop, just because of this discrimination coefficient. So focus on the word perceived cost. Okay, this is why this is how discrimination coefficient is applied in this context. So this last point is what I just explained to you. All right. So production function, we are now going deeper into this analysis. Production function is quantity is a function of employing white workers, employing black workers, where Q is the firm's output, EW is the white workers, EB is the black workers. They are equally productive. And if a firm needs to hire 100 workers, and it can hire 50 black and 50 white, or 100 blacks and 0 white, or 0 black and 100 white. So we are assuming that all these combinations are available in the market, and they are willing to work for this firm. So the firm needs 100 workers. So it has these options. I just made them up. So if wages of black and white workers are equal, then any difference in hiring would reflect discrimination. So if all of them were equally talented, one of the reasons why one would hire more black could be that they were first in line, right? But in this example, we are assuming that if they are equally talented, they would be on average, if there are many job opportunities, not 100, let's say 10,000, then on average percentage of white and black would be equal, because employer does not discriminate between the two. Assume that employer discriminates. Now we are assuming that he does. The employer acts as if the black wage is not WB, but instead it is equal to WB into 1 plus D, as we discussed before. So he will hire only blacks if WB into 1 plus D is less than WW, right? So even if he dislikes black, it will be profitable to hire black workers if this even after accounting for the discrimination coefficient, this number is less than WW. So in my previous example, I assumed that both workers are being paid $100. In this example, let's assume that wages of black persons with equal productivity are $80. Hiring white workers is more expensive, let's say $100. So even when an employer discriminates against white workers, after incorporating, if this coefficient is not too high, let's say 0.2, then even after incorporating the discrimination coefficient, this number will be lower than white wages. So it is more profitable for the employer to hire a black worker, because even after applying the discrimination coefficient, black workers are cheaper and they work as efficiently as the white workers. And the employer will only hire white workers when this WB multiplied by 1 plus D is higher than white wages. So it doesn't make any sense to hire expensive workers as compared to the cheaper workers that are, of course, after accounting for 1 plus D, that are more expensive than the white workers. So the ones that only hire white workers are called white firms. The ones that only hire black workers are called all black firms. So this is how it looks like in terms of graphs. On vertical axis we have wages, on horizontal axis we have employment. This is a white firm and this is a black firm. So white firm will only hire white workers, because this is the VMP, which is also called the short run demand curve of labor. This right here is the similar one, but the only difference between these two is this incorporation of the 1 plus D. It's incorporated in both, but just have a look at this one. So WB is much lower. In our example it was $80. So just assume that this is much lower than white wages. So after accounting for discrimination coefficient 1 plus D naught, let's say 0.1, this perceived wage is, even though it is higher than the WB, is higher than WB, but still lower than white wages right here. So since this is lower than white wages, black firms will keep on hiring the black workers. Now another coefficient, let's say 0.2, WB, the same WB multiplied by 1 plus D1 equal to, let's say, 0.2. If this number is still less than white wages, then the firm will still be a black firm, because it is cheaper to hire black workers here, because this wage is lower than white wages. Any number of discrimination above this, if the discrimination coefficient is above D1, then this whole sum of WB into 1 plus D, this number will be higher than white wages. So it will be more expensive to hire a black worker as compared to the white worker. So the employee will prefer to hire white workers right here. So this firm is a white firm because its discrimination coefficient is higher than D1. So this firm only hires white workers here, and this firm only hires black workers here, because even after incorporating for the discrimination coefficient, this black workers are cheaper for this firm. All right, so discrimination is not profitable. Why? We'll look into this graph. Discrimination reduces profits in two ways. Even if the discriminatory firm hires only black workers, it hires too few workers. If discriminatory firm hires only white workers, it hires too few workers at a very high wage. Okay, perceived cost is higher. So because in labor economics we are comparing marginal cost with marginal revenue. So when we are incorporating the discriminatory coefficient, it means that even though if the employer was non-discriminatory, he would perceive the cost of black worker as it is, as this was in this case. If the employer, the D was 0, if this D is 0, it means that the employer does not discriminate against black workers. If this D was 0, if there was no discrimination, then it would be profitable for the employer employer to hire these black workers because they are equally productive. Value of marginal product is the same for these two, and it will be profitable for them. But since we have non-zero discriminatory coefficient, it is not profitable for the firm to hire these workers at a higher level of a low number of black workers. So as it increases at this is the horizontal axis, we have discrimination coefficient, the D's that we saw in the previous graph, from 0. If this is 0, as I just mentioned, then the profit would be maximum, because firm will perceive the wages of black workers as they are, and they will hire them at the same cost and earn more profit. We are talking about economic profits here. Okay, after accounting for the discriminatory coefficient. Discriminatory coefficients are not something that are going out of your pocket. These are just economic disutility associated with hiring a black worker because of the discrimination. Right. So after you keep on increasing the discriminatory coefficient, profits go on keep on declining. All right. And after reaching DW, then after reaching DW, there is no effect of D anymore, because after DW, all of these numbers right here would mean that perceived wages of the black workers are higher than the white workers, so nobody will hire black workers anymore, and they will keep on hiring the white workers. So profits will not change after that. So all of the employers that have D discrimination coefficient greater than DW, they will hire white workers, and they will be called white firms. And for all values of D after DW, it does not affect the profitability, because everybody is hiring white workers from this point onwards. All right. So employee discrimination, I'm going to speed up this lecture from this point. Suppose that white dislike working along blacks, and blacks are indifferent about race of their co-workers. White workers who receive a wage of WW dollars will act as if their wage rate is only WW into 1 minus D. As I mentioned before, they do not like to work with the black workers, so their perceived wages are lower. For blacks, both their actual and utility adjusted wage rates are given by WB. Suppose white worker who dislikes working alongside blacks has 2 job offers, both at $15 per hour. But one firm has a completely white workforce, and other firm consists of black and white workers. Because the worker dislikes blacks, the integrated firm offers a lower wage. So we are calling this one an integrated firm, where blacks and whites are working together. Therefore, integrated firm will have to offer more than $15 per hour if they wish to attract white workers, because even if the employer is not discriminating, but he knows that the employee might, then if it is very important to hire the white worker, the employer has to pay more than $15 per hour. Now, customer discrimination. If customer has a taste for discrimination, their purchasing decisions are not based on the actual price of the good, P, but on the utility adjusted price, or P into 1 plus D, where D is the discrimination coefficient. If white dislikes purchasing from black sellers, consumer discrimination reduces the demand for goods and services sold by minorities. How do the sellers handle customer discrimination? By keeping black workers away from the sensitive positions. So if the shop is located in an area where this kind of discrimination prevails, then the customer will only feel that he's paying more utility adjusted price if he has to deal with the black worker. So if black worker is working in the background in the store or something, then it would be okay, because the customer will be dealing with the white worker or of the same race. then the employer can adjust the positions of the workers to avoid this kind of a problem. There is no impact on firm's profit. It is a profit maximizing firm. It will either allocate workers smartly or hire the ones that maximize profits. Impact on product prices and wages. Firm will have to reduce the price if it wants to keep the black customer. It should not be a customer, it should be black worker. As a result, wage of the black worker will decline to compensate the firm. The facts, the numbers are telling us that where majority of the customers are black, 58% of the newly hired workers are black, whereas only 9% of the newly hired workers are black in contact firms where most customers are white. Occupation crowding out hypothesis argues that women are intentionally segregated into particular occupations. In a social climate, some jobs are considered female dominated jobs and some male dominated jobs. In a society where gender discrimination exists, the crowding of women into a relatively small number of occupations inevitably reduces the wages of so-called female jobs. Because there is a discrimination coefficient associated with gender discrimination as well, so the occupations in which most of the workers are females, the wage rates of those occupations are lower. There is a study that reports that the man working in an occupation that is female dominated also earns 15% less than a man working in an occupation that is predominantly male. Of course, they have accounted for education, age and other things, but if there is an occupation that is male dominant, they are likely to pay more. In short, it is a femaleness of the job that leads to lower wages, regardless of whether the worker employed in the job is a man or a woman. Raw wage differential. So we are now going to measure discrimination going towards Oaxaca and Blinder. So raw wage difference is simply subtracting female wage from male wage. So this will give you the difference between male and female wages. If you have earning function in mind, if you want to see if education skills have any impact on wages, so you can have two types of earning functions. One is the male earning function. We have WM on the left hand side. We want to see if skills have anything to do with wages, and this will be the coefficient which will suggest that if skills are increased by 1 unit, let's say 1 year of education, what is the impact on wages. This is for the female. So if a skill of a female increases by 1 unit, what is the impact on wages? So beta is telling us that. If there are 0 skills, if there is an unskilled job, 0 skills, 0 skills, so this will give us the coefficient for unskilled jobs. And if you subtract these two from, if you subtract this from this equation, as it is mentioned here, so you will get this equation. So it's simply this part here is this part, and if you are subtracting these two, then minus this whole thing, and when minus goes inside the bracket, this also becomes minus. So this is the differential of wages in terms of earning functions. And this is Oaxaca-Blinder decomposition. So in the equation that I mentioned before, if you simply add and subtract this, so adding and subtracting means that mathematically it doesn't change the equation, because adding and subtracting means that they cancel themselves out, but adding and subtracting some components give us very insightful solutions. So this is why we are doing this. So we are multiplying the coefficient of the male earning function with the average of female skills, and we are adding that and subtracting that from the equation. So after some transformation, you can work on this transformation at home. This is fairly easy. After some transformations, you will get this equation. What this equation is telling you is that on the right hand side, this is the difference in wages. Since we are talking about the differences in wages between male and female, so this is the difference in wages because of the differences in skills. So the idea is that it is quite possible that females are less skilled that's why they are paid less. So in this transformation, we are actually decomposing the skill component of the wage differential with the discrimination component of the wage differential. So this is the difference between average skills of male and female. So this is the difference, and if you multiply this with the beta for male, it will give you what is the contribution of skills towards the differences in wages. Here, right here, we have the differences if between the intercept. As I mentioned before, if there were 0 skills, then it means that the employee is unskilled, completely unskilled. And if there is no discrimination between the two, male and female, then this should be 0, right? So for unskilled male and unskilled female, the wages should be the same, and the differences should be 0. But if this is non-zero, it means that there is some discrimination going on. Also, the differences in this coefficient. So 1 unit increase in male education is giving us beta M. 1 unit increase in female skills is giving us beta F. So if there is a difference between these two, it means that the additional increment in skills for male and female is giving us different increments in wages. It would suggest that since we have already accounted for skills, it suggests that this difference is because of the biasness in the labor market. The first term, and this is what has been explained, what I just explained, this is mentioned in words below. So I know that I'm rushing a little bit because this is a PhD class, so I expect that you will solve this on your own, and it's not that difficult. It looks difficult, but it's not that difficult. The steps are already mentioned. The only step that you have to do is that to go from this red equation to this equation, and I've already mentioned how to do that. The key is to understand why the differences due to skills are mentioned like this, and why differences due to discrimination are mentioned like this. And the same equation is mentioned here. So if there was, right now we have on horizontal axis schooling, I was saying skills, but schooling is a signal for skills, so let's forgive me for that. So S is for schooling. I'm sorry, the equations that I showed before, S is for schooling, but it's not entirely wrong. Now I'm defending myself, because schooling is a signal for skills. So schooling is on the horizontal axis. On vertical axis we have dollars, but this is wages in dollars, so this is wages. Women's earning function is slightly flatter than men's earning function, and how this is calculated is that when schooling is 0, when you put 0 in the earning function, then the wages are alpha F for female and alpha M for male. So this, if this difference is non-zero, it means that already there is some kind of discrimination going on. Slope is steeper than this one. It means that beta is higher. Beta is the slope, right? So higher the slope is, higher is the beta. And for each increment in the wages, each increment in the schooling, the differences in wages is higher than female, which is reflecting some kind of discrimination that is going on. So this is quite easy to understand. Now, if there is a female with average skill level of schooling level of SF, then she would be here. As per women's earning function, she will earn WF. But at the same skill level, if she was a male, she would earn this wage level. Okay, so I'm using the same schooling level, but extending this to the male earning function. If she was a male, she would earn this level. On the contrary, if a male is at this skill level, he would earn WM. But if he was a female, he would earn much lower wage rate, something around here. So this is why it's very interesting to explore whether some of the differences are coming out of discrimination and some are coming out of the skills or schooling. Okay, so I'll conclude this lecture right here, and this will be accompanied by a student presentation, and I'll come back with lecture number 15 next week, inshallah. Thank you so much.